Welcome back in. Today we're going to be discussing 8 of my must-draft running backs for 2024. Let's go ahead and get right into it. I wanted to start off with somebody in the first round. I really went back and forth here because I think there's a lot of different names I could pick from, whether it's Breece Hall, Bijan Robinson, Jonathan Taylor, who's also going in the first round and deserves some consideration here. But I really wanted to go with Bijan Robinson. Bijan Robinson was really done dirty last year by Arthur Smith, and thankfully, Arthur Smith was fired like he should have been because what he did with him didn't make any sense whatsoever. The man only averaged 12.6 carries per game, but did see 5.1 targets per game, 976 rushing yards, 487 receiving yards, and 8 touchdowns last year, which was good for 14.7 fantasy points per game. Now, as a rookie running back, that is not a terrible number. Before a lot of people drafted him inside the first round, it didn't pay off. But he was still very good on a per-touch basis. He was top 5 in missed tackles forced per attempt. He was 7th in evaded tackles and 12th in yards created per touch. He was also good as a pass catcher. He was 8th in yards per reception, and he would also had a 3rd in target share, and he was 21st in yards per out run. Now, the most mind-blowing thing to me was how much of a true committee this was last year. We saw Bijan Robinson lead this team with 216 carries, but we saw Tyler Algier wasn't too far behind with 186. It was even worse inside the red zone, where Tyler Algier actually led this team with 34 red zone touches compared to only 21 for Bijan Robinson, and Cordell Patterson saw 7. No wonder Arthur Smith was fired. Now we don't have to worry about that because the offense is going to be in much better hands with Zach Robinson as the offensive coordinator here within this offense. They've already talked a lot this offseason how they want to utilize him like Christian McCaffrey. And to be honest, if you spend a top 10 pick in the NFL draft on a running back, which you should never do, but if you do, you should definitely be utilizing him a lot more than what they did last year. I think Bijan Robinson can easily finish as the RB1 this year, and he's easily going to break 20 fantasy points per game. So I love Bijan Robinson. It was really close between Bijan Robinson and Breece Hall for me. I go back and forth all the time. Who should be by number 2, number 3? Right now, I have Bijan at number 2 on the board, just behind Christian McCaffrey. So let's keep moving here. Let's move on to another running back we're going to hit on. And again, I really could have went back and forth on this one between Jonathan Taylor and Jahmyr Gibbs. I ended up giving Jahmyr Gibbs a slight edge. Last year in 15 games, he was 8th in fantasy points per game. He had over 1,200 rushing yards, 11 touchdowns. He averaged about 15 touches per game last year, but he was great on a per-touch basis. 7th at 2 yards per carry, 2nd explosive run rate, 9th in missed tackles forced per attempt, and 15th in yards after contact per attempt last season. One of the pushbacks had to do with David Montgomery and his involvement. Now, David Montgomery's not going anywhere. He's back again for another year. He is going to take some goal line touches and things like that. That is going to happen. But we did see a shift last year. From weeks 10 through 18, Gibbs only received 1 less carry at the goal line last year, which is something we should keep into consideration. I do expect Jahmyr Gibbs to be the 1A in this offense this year. He's going to be very involved in the passing game, and this offense is going to be one of the best in the league. He's also running behind one of the best offensive lines in the league. They are the 2nd highest graded run blocking line last season, according to PFF. So this offensive line is really good. It's going to be the same as it was last year. They replaced Jonah Jackson with Kevin Zeitler. So overall, this offensive line is going to be incredible again this year. So Jahmyr Gibbs is a very easy click, especially if you're wanting to wait at the back half of the first and you want to take Jahmyr Gibbs and then come back and another really strong wide receiver there. Really like that start if you have one of the last picks of the first round. So let's keep moving. Let's talk about a player that has a little bit of wide range of outcomes, but one I think is going to pay off big time, and that's Achane. His current ADP is RB11, 25th overall, so he's being drafted right there at the back half of the 2nd, early 3rd round. Now, for a player that only averaged 12 carries per game, hard to deny what he did last year. His 17.3 fantasy points per game was awesome last year. Now, last year, he only had 800 rushing yards, 197 receiving yards, but the 11 touchdowns really pushed him over the top, where he averaged 17.3 fantasy points per game. Now, he was absolutely electric every time he touched the ball. He was 1st in explosive run rate, 4th in yards created per touch, 7th in missed tackles forced per attempt, and 1st in yards after contact per attempt. He was not as good as a pass catcher, but still more than good enough. 17th in yards per route run, and I actually think there's some room for improvement here, as he was only 25th in route participation last year. Now, Raheem Mostert still remains here, and they did draft Jalen Wright in this year's draft, and there's been a lot of buzz around Jalen Wright so far in camp, but he is a much bigger threat, I think, to Raheem Mostert than I think he ever is to Achane. Now, running backs like Achane have existed and have been excellent in years past on limited opportunity. I don't think Achane is ever going to be a player who's averaging 20 touches per game. It's not going to happen. But I think he can be very much like a Chris Johnson, Jamal Charles, Aaron Jones type running backs that could get the job done on efficiency. So Achane, I think, really has the potential to be a top 5 running back this year. Let's keep moving. Let's move over to probably one of my favorite running backs to draft in the entire thing, and that is Isiah Pacheco. I know I'm well ahead of consensus. I have him just outside of my top 5 as my RB6 right now, and I don't really understand why he's not being drafted higher. Right now, he's being drafted in the 3rd round. Listen, last year he had a 72% opportunity share. He averaged 14.6 carries. He was also 11th in carries inside the 5-yard line and converted 8 of them into touchdowns last year. He was also good on a per touch basis, 18th in yards created per touch, 11th in breakaway run rate last year. I think there's actually some room to grow here in the receiving game. He averaged 3.5 targets per game last year and 244 receiving yards, and he was 20th in yards per route run. But he only ran 41% of the routes, while Jerick McKinnon actually ran 21% of the routes and received an 8% target share. But keep in mind, Jerick McKinnon is gone, is no longer in this offense. It is now CEH and Deneric Prince as the running backs that are behind him. Yes, I guess if they wanted to, they could bring him back at a later date, but right now it doesn't look to be the case. It looks to be they are perfectly happy with Isiah Pacheco, who ranked top 10 in both red zone rushing attempts and red zone targets last year. Now, his 15.3 fantasy points per game was solid last year, but in the 7 games last year without Jerick McKinnon, he averaged 21 touches per game, almost 100 total yards, and 1.2 touchdowns. And he went from 15 fantasy points to 20.6 fantasy points per game, which would have made him the RB3. So I love Isiah Pacheco. He is in a fantastic spot in one of the best offenses in the league. What's not to love about Isiah Pacheco? I think he is one of the easiest clicks in the 3rd round if you're looking for a running back. If you went wide receiver to start your draft, Isiah Pacheco is the perfect hero RB running back that you can take. Let's keep moving here. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on James Cook because I just did a player profile on him. If you want to see the more in-depth version, you can watch that. But here's a player that averaged about 15 touches per game last year, had almost 1,500 total yards, 6 touchdowns last year, 13.7 fantasy points per game. He was pretty good on a per touch basis. But the one thing that I really like is his ability as a pass catcher. 6th in yards per route run last year and 2nd in yards per reception. And I actually think he's going to be even more involved in this offense as a pass catcher this year because 240 targets have been vacated. That is 41% of the total team targets are now gone from this offense this year because Stephon Diggs and Gabe Davis have left. They drafted Keon Coleman. They brought in Curtis Samuel, but I don't think that is enough to deter me from James Cook. And just this little nugget here that I want to mention is switching from Ken Dorsey to Joe Brady paid off in a big way last year. With Dorsey, he averaged 14.4 touches and 12 fantasy points per game. But with Joe Brady, he averaged 5 more touches per game and nearly 5 fantasy points per game as well last season. So I think he's in for a really solid season. And I think he is going to be, at the very least, a top 10 running back in 2024. Let's keep it moving here. And let's talk about Kenneth Walker, who's the RB17 or 44th overall. Now, this is a new regime change here in Seattle. Gone is Pete Carroll and his New Balances. Thankfully, I have been hoping that Pete Carroll would leave for a long time. This game has passed him by a little bit. Now they bring in a former Washington offensive coordinator, Ryan Grubb, who's taking over. And by every report now out of camp, it is pointing to Kenneth Walker easily being the team's best running back here in this backfield. And that's not really all that surprising. Last year, he had a 67% opportunity share, 905 rushing yards, 9 touchdowns, 13.3 fantasy points per game. He was also 3rd in evaded tackles and 26th in yards created per touch. Now, I would like to see more involved in the passing game as he was 38th in route participation, despite being 14th in yards per route run. While Walker remains a super explosive running back who remains a boomer bust type runner, but if he can play a full season and command a much larger target share, I think Walker could be one of the steals of the draft under new OC Ryan Grubb. So I do really like this opportunity. I think this is a good spot. I think he could be kind of a dark horse candidate at RB17 that could finish as a top 12 running back this year. I know Zach Charbonnet still exists in this offense, but I do think Kenneth Walker is going to maintain nearly a 70% opportunity share this year. And really, the big question is if he can be more involved in the passing game. I really do like Kenneth Walker. Let's keep moving. We have 2 more guys to hit on before we get out of here. Let's talk about my guy, Zamir White. I've pretty much been talking about him all offseason. I really like Zamir White this year, especially at cost. RB23, 69th overall. Last year, once he took over for Josh Jacobs over the final 4 weeks of the season, he was 3rd in yards after contact per attempt, 17th in yards per touch, 15th in explosive run rate, and ranked 9th in expected fantasy points per game. He also averaged 21 carries per game, 3 targets per game, and there was zero reason he should be going at RB23 because I think he is going to be the absolute workhorse in this backfield. They added Alexander Madison. They also drafted Dylan Lobby in the 6th round. Now, I think Dylan Lobby's actually going to be involved as a pass catcher. He's going to take away some pass catching work, some 3rd down work from Zamir White. But Zamir White is going to be the absolute workhorse here in this backfield. This is not going to be a great offense. That is not as exciting. I think he's capped in terms of touchdown upside. But I still think this can be a player that's going to see 20 plus touches per game. And I think, even if he maintains the 3, 4 targets per game like he did last year, that is still going to put him inside the top 20 in terms of running back. So Zamir White is a very easy click. And I think somebody that is going to finish as a top 15 running back this year, and he's being drafted at RB 23. Lastly, I know, just hear me out. I think people that have been around a while are know who I'm going to say. It's somebody that I'm going to talk about, my last guy here. It's somebody that I've been on board with, but I'm not getting off the train yet. And I think that he is going to be a pretty solid value. I think he can bring back RB2 upside. Javonte Williams, right now being drafted at RB 34, 95th overall. Now, before you click out of this video, because you're like, I'm not listening to this, I'm not drafting Javonte Williams, I just want to say this. Last season, he had a 58% opportunity share. He averaged about 13.6 carries, 3.6 targets. He was ninth in red zone touches last year. He had 774 rushing yards, 220 receiving yards, and 5 touchdowns. He averaged 11.2 fantasy points per game. I know, nothing sexy, right? But there's been a lot of narrative around him, just how bad he was last year. But looking at the numbers, he wasn't terrible. He was 18th in yards per route run with a 13% target share last year. He was ninth in breakaway run rate. He was 36th in yards created per touch, and he was 22nd in evaded tackles. So this is a player that was coming off a devastating knee injury last year. And the long history we have with these types of running backs say that they do not get back to being the guy they were pre-injury until year two. I don't know why sometimes we choose to give people passes and other players not. It was hilarious. A couple months ago there was all these people talking, and some beat writers put out there that Javonte Williams could be a cut candidate. Now that just seems laughable because Javonte Williams has been getting a lot of praise, not just from Sean Payton, but from the beat reporters saying that he looks like the guy that showed up his rookie season and the guy that the Broncos drafted. He has dropped 12 pounds. He is back to his UNC playing weight. And I think all these things are going to be a feather in his cap. I think he is going to be the RB1 in this offense. I get it. It's not a super exciting offense, but all the risk is baked out of it. He's RB 34, 95th overall. It's not as if he's going as like a top 20 running back or something like that. I am buying the discount here on Javonte Williams. I think he is a very good pass catcher. This was a team that was first in targets to running backs last year. I don't expect that to change. I think he's proven to be a really strong pass catcher. And I think it's honestly possible that we see Samaje Perine get cut. I don't know if they're going to keep 4 running backs. And they drafted Audric Estime. Now, something to keep in mind with Audric Estime, he has been dealing with a little bit of injuries and stuff like that through camp, and that is going to hurt him. But I think Javonte Williams is going to be the 1A in this backfield. I think Jaleel McLaughlin is going to check in and see touches as well. Who was also very good, but doesn't have the prototypical size. And I think if that happens, Javonte Williams, I think, still probably maintains somewhere about a 55, 60% opportunity share. And I think he could probably get you around 13, 14 fantasy points per game. And while that's not blowing your socks off, I get it. But at RB 34, this could end up being a really solid flex option for people in a lot of weeks. So that being said, be sure to hit that like and subscribe button for future content. Let me know in the comments section below what you think I got right, what I got wrong. We'll see you on the next one. Bye.